Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends. Guys, welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where you know the drill. People seem to think they can do whatever the heck they want because they're special. And in today's episode, guys, a rude Karen learns that sometimes it doesn't pay to be petty, guys. I hope you enjoy the lineup of stories today. Hit subscribe if you haven't, and as always, you can send stories right here. That was my phone dinging, actually. I didn't put it on silent. Okay, let's dive in, guys. So this happened a few months ago. I'm in college, and a friend and I decided to go study and grab lunch together after. The restaurant we decided to eat at had a bunch of outdoor seating, like 6 or 7 tables with no one sitting outside. The weather was nice, so we decided to do what many college students do, which is to get day drunk at the restaurant. So a few minutes in, I look up and there's a lady just staring at us. She then marches up to us, and she starts talking loudly and says, "Oh, that's the spot I usually sit in." My friend and I are kinda like, okay, this is the spot you usually sit in. We thought she was crazy, so we just ignored her. Around this time, the waiter comes out, and he asked her where she wants to be seated. Obviously, she wants the table that we're at. He tells her that's not possible, and there's many other tables that are free. He then asked her to follow him. My friend glances at me, and we debate moving because she doesn't want to deal with any confrontation. We hear the waiter suggest indoor seating, or one of the tables outside that are free, which was like all of them. The woman refuses, and the guy suggests all the other open tables again. She again refuses and looks pointedly at us, and she starts telling him to make us move, or she'll go to another restaurant. The waiter did come over and ask us if we were willing to sit at any other open tables in the restaurant, so we shrug and say, "Don't worry about it, we'll move." The waiter thanked us for cooperating. We only had 2 beers and no food, so it was just a matter of grabbing the beers and moving tables. Now what really struck me though was how immature the lady was. She was a grown-ass woman, and if she had come over and asked us if we wouldn't mind moving, we totally would have moved. But her repeated looks and childish behavior was ridiculous, and did seem off for a 40-something-year-old woman. And the privilege. I would have never dreamed of making someone move so I can have my spot at a restaurant. I still haven't really gotten over that incident, and it's one that has stuck with me since I moved to Utah. I guess I was just surprised that some people can be so entitled. Yeah, guys, if that were me, I definitely wouldn't have moved. This is exactly how she feels so self-entitled, because she knows if she causes a scene, she'll get exactly what she wants. And guys, I don't blame the waiter at all. It's much easier to just give the screaming Karens what they want, because if they resist, it's just gonna escalate and she'll try to fire him, and it's not gonna end well. Oh, how I wish the waiter just told her, "Good, go to another restaurant then, because there's already people sitting at your table." Okay, so my husband is 32 years old, and I'm 30. We've been married for just over a year now, and things couldn't be rockier. I have a job, and I make a decent amount of money, whereas my husband, he's not made as much as me. So due to this, and the fact that he's still living with his parents when we got married, we decided that he would move in with me, and I would continue to pay the rent and bills as long as he put money towards other things we may need as a couple, such as groceries, etc., etc. However, once we got married, he started to cut down his work hours without saying anything to me. At first, he gave the explanation that I made plenty of money for both of us, so he could just work part-time and do work around the house while I was the main breadwinner. I was fine with this, although I was a little upset that he just assumed it would be okay, but I didn't say anything as I felt this fair. He did do some work around the house initially, but he spent the majority of the time going out to the bar, playing video games, etc., to the point where I was the one working, cooking, cleaning, and doing the other household chores. My husband told me that he was laid off 2 months ago for reasons out of his control. I assumed in this time he would begin job hunting, and I began paying for everything. Now, while I do earn a decent amount of money, it's not to the point where I can pay rent, bills, groceries, insurance, contribute to emergency savings, and finance the lifestyle that my husband had started indulging in. I began paying for his nights out, subbing him money for trips to look for work, all the while I was under the assumption that he would be searching for a new job, at least to finance his hobbies. So about a week ago, I asked him how the job hunt was going, and he told me he didn't feel like it was worth it. He said to me that he was comfortable with what we had, and he didn't plan on going back to work when I can support us. I wasn't happy, to say the least. I confronted him about how I was doing everything to finance and take care of our household, while he sat around and played video games. And during this argument, he let it slip that he had actually quit and never looked for another job. I was furious that he lied to me, and I told him I didn't want him in my home right now. Now, my in-laws are understanding to an extent, but they're calling me a complete a-hole for not wanting him to come home until he gets a job. I've seen my husband in this time, but never in our home, always out somewhere. I no longer pay for everything, and his attitude towards me is making me question our entire relationship, so am I the a-hole? Yeah, I don't think so at all. Everybody's pretty much saying that this guy sounds so friggin' lazy, and his behavior definitely sounds like he's an entitled person who happened to find his meal ticket, guys. Like, imagine getting married, having all these plans for the future, and then all of a sudden your spouse goes, well, that's it, I'm not gonna work anymore, you can support us now. So OP did come into the comments saying that she does have a prenup and her name is on the lease and all the vehicles. Like, how the heck did this guy get a woman like that to marry him? So guys, let me know what you're doing if you're in OP shoes. Are you kicking your spouse to the curb, or are you going to try to work it out? So while browsing the sub, I used to think there's no way these people exist in real life. Nobody would ever act like that, but boy was I wrong. So some quick context. I'm in high school and I work part-time at a Chuck E. Cheese. On this day, I had just started my shift, and around 10:30, a mom comes in with her 8-year-old kid. The mom comes up to me and says, "Hi, we're here for a birthday party." Now hearing that, I get kind of nervous for a minute because birthday parties usually take a while to set up, and I had no idea we're booked for one today. So I smile at her, but panic at the same time and say, "Okay, let me check this with the system. Can I have a last name?" The woman gives me her last name, and I say, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I can't find a party booking. Are you sure you have the right location?" To that, the woman responds, "Oh, we don't have a reservation, but my boy's turning 8 years old today, and he loves Chuck E. Cheese." At that I say, "Oh, I'm sorry, but you need to reserve at least a week in advance. The whole place is full today." The woman then says, "Oh, come on. You're obviously just being lazy. No one's even here. You should be grateful that I'm giving you business." The woman then pulls me aside and says, "I've been promising this to him for months. Don't F it up." I start to apologize again, and that's when she starts raising her voice saying, "Why are you disappointing my child? Get off your ass and do something." At this point, the kid notices something's wrong and that his mom's getting mad. He then asks, "Mom, when can I get tokens?" She looks at him and says, "In a minute, sweetie, this person is being very rude." Now I did feel kind of bad for the kid, so I tell the mom to wait over there and I go get my supervisor. I tell her about the situation. Now the Chuck E. Cheese is full, but we're also fully staffed for the next few hours, so she says it is possible to get a party ready in about 1.5 hours. Again, I do feel bad for the kids, so I give him a few tokens to play with that I got from the back, while talking to the mom. I told her we can have the party ready in about 1.5 hours, and it's gonna cost this much, which is more than usual because it's last minute. She then tells me something that made my heart stop. She says, "No, I can't do one in 1.5 hours. Everyone in his class is coming in 15 minutes. I need a party in 10 minutes. Of course, hearing that, I just laugh at how absurd the woman is and say, yeah, that's not gonna happen. So with that, she's visibly pissed. She's screaming at me to get the manager. She's screaming how I'm so rude, how I don't give a damn about her son, how I'm spoiled, I'm an entitled brat, how I don't care about anybody else in the world except for myself. I then kid you not, she pushes over the ticket counter, which of course falls and cracks open, and at this point everyone's just staring. She then threatens me and says, "If you don't have a party ready for me in 5 minutes, I will get my husband here and you don't want to know what he'll do to you." Yeah, so at this point I tell her she has to leave. I won't stand for her threats. She then says, "I'm not leaving. You disrespected my son, and if you don't give us a party, I'll make sure you don't have a job tomorrow." Her kid at this point is obviously in tears. He's crying at his mom raising her voice and crying at the fact that he's not getting a birthday party. So the manager comes out at this point and kicks her out, and she's yelling every swear word in the book at him, saying how we single-handedly destroyed her kid's birthday party, and we all need to rot in hell. As soon as my manager threatens police on her, that's when she pulls her kid out of there. We then spend the next hour cleaning up the mess she made and telling the kids' classmates that the party was cancelled. About 40 kids came to Chuck E. Cheese that day. I hope his birthday got better after that. Guys, like rolling up to Chuck E. Cheese, expecting them to cater to 40 plus kids without notifying staff in advance. Yeah, she's the one who ruined her son's birthday party. I do want to give her the benefit of the doubt and say that maybe she didn't know she had to call in ahead of time to schedule a birthday party and really thought she could waltz in there, but I don't know. I agree with OP. I certainly hope his birthday got better after that. Okay, buckle up, buckaroos, because this is a long one. During my last few years of high school, I delivered newspapers every morning. The money wasn't great, but it was my first job, and I really enjoyed the peace and quiet that comes with being awake before the sun rises. It was an enjoyable experience, however, there were downsides. For example, we had to go around once a month to collect payments, which was a real pain. If you can't get a customer to answer the door, they can't pay you. And if a customer decided to simply stop paying you, there was nothing you could do about it. The subscription could only be canceled by the customers themselves. So if someone decided not to pay you, the money was taken out of your earnings, and the delivery person was the one stuck with the bill. Unfortunately, this was extremely common. This would eventually be the reason I quit, because I couldn't afford to work 2 hours a day and not get paid for it. So one morning, as I arrived home from finishing my route, my mother was extremely agitated. My boss had called and woken her up 15 minutes earlier because he had started receiving calls from the paper, saying that several customers on the route connected to mine had called to say that they had not received their paper. And this had happened several times this week, so he had to fire the person on that route. He wanted to know if I could take over the route. The route was only about half the size of the route I was currently doing and would only add 30 minutes to my trip, so I agreed to take it. The first week passes uneventfully. One morning, during the second week of doing my new route, I'm heading back over to my bike when I hear a woman's voice calling out, "Excuse me? Hey, you, excuse me?" And that's when I turn around to see a woman. She's coming down the driveway in a t-shirt and underwear, holding the newspaper in one hand and using her free hand to try to pull the bottom of her t-shirt lower to preserve some sense of modesty. I recognize her. She's one of the substitute teachers at my high school. And she says, "Excuse me, what the F is this?" She says that holding up the newspaper. I stand there confused for a moment before replying, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Karen, I don't understand." She then cuts me off and says, "What did I tell you? I thought I told you if you guys are gonna fire my daughter for being a little late one day, I don't want your damn newspaper." Now hearing that, I'm a little confused and say, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Karen, I've only had this route for a few days and I'm certain I'm not the person you spoke with. Maybe you spoke with Mr. Boss." She then says, "Well, if you're not the person I spoke to, then how do you know my name?" She said that wearing her smuggest "I've got you now" face. I tell her, "I'm one of your students. I've been going to the high school that you teach at for 4 years. If you want to cancel your subscription, you have to call the number. I can't cancel it for you." Of course, this obviously wasn't what she wanted to hear. She then gets really calm for a second and then looks at me in the eyes and says, "You think you're really effing smart, don't you?" Before throwing the paper at me and turning around to waddle back up the driveway in her granny panties. I then called my boss when I got home to tell him what happened, that she wanted her subscription canceled. He told me that when he had called to fire her daughter, Karen had picked up the phone and screamed the same thing at him, and that he had also told her that she needed to call the subscription line if she wanted her service canceled, and that the teenage paperboy could not cancel the subscription for her. He also said when Karen's daughter accepted the job, she told him that she would be away every second weekend at her father's, and she would not be able to deliver the Saturday and Sunday papers, and that her mom would deliver them. The next Saturday, I received an updated subscription list and checked if her address was still on it. The address was, meaning that she still hadn't called the line to cancel, so I had no choice but to keep delivering the paper to her house. This continued for a few more months until I was able to convince my boss to cancel her paper due to non-payment. So one morning on a weekday, I accidentally slept in until about 4:30 a.m., which meant I had to rush to get them delivered before 6:30 a.m., which is the cutoff time before a paper can be considered late. So I deliver the paper at Karen's house around 6:15, which once again is near the end of my route. This time, Karen runs out wearing pants, and she starts yelling at me about how the paper's late and that she's gonna call the paper to get me fired, just like they did to her daughter for being late one time. I did try to explain to her that the paper, while arriving a little later than normal, is still not past the cutoff time, and that the paper is only guaranteed to be in her mailbox before 6:30. And she, of course, in typical Karen fashion, was having none of it. She screams at me and says, "You can't talk your way out of this one. You are so effing fired. I won't quit until you're fired." She then runs back in the house laughing to herself. About 2 hours later, I'm sitting in class waiting for the first period to start, and who should walk in to teach the class that day but Miss Karen. She barely takes 2 steps into the class when she spots me, and she begins shaking her finger in my direction, saying, "Nah, no, not you. You go to the office right now. I don't want to look at you right now." My entire class is baffled for 2 reasons. The first reason being that I was a pretty good kid, and I often didn't get in trouble. And the second reason being that it happened so quickly after she walked into the room that I couldn't have even had time to misbehave in any way, shape, or form. I arrive at the principal's office and check in with the secretary. She asked me why I was in the office and not in class. I say to her, "Look, Miss Secretary, I know every kid who gets sent to the office probably says this, but honestly, I didn't do anything wrong." I then explain what happened between myself and Karen earlier concerning the paper route, and that this was about something that happened outside of school during non-hours. She looks at me slightly confused, and then she nods at another girl sitting in the waiting room, and asked if I knew who she was. I didn't. I had never seen her before. She was a pretty girl, maybe 2 years younger than me, with bleached blonde hair. The fact that she had been crying was obvious. Her eye makeup had been running, and her face was red. As we sat there waiting to speak to the principal, she would periodically play with her bracelets and rings, which is how I caught a glimpse of the fresh purple bruise around her wrist. The principal's door opens and the secretary whispers something to him, which causes him to glance at me. He then says, "Mr. Gregg, could you come in here please?" The pretty girl's eyes light up with recognition as if she knows who I am, and it's at this point my foolish teenage self realizes that there's something bigger going on than me being kicked out of physics class before the class even starts. The principal asked me what happened, and I explained to the best of my ability what had happened that morning. He then thanked me and asked me to have a seat again. When I came out, the girl was gone. The principal asked the secretary if there was another teacher available with a free period. She said, "Yes, Miss Math teacher is free right now. Should I page her?" He tells her, "Yes, please." The math teacher escorts me back to class and tells Miss Karen that she needs to go to the principal's office. We spend the rest of the class with a free period, and I never saw Miss Karen again. And as far as I knew, that was the end of the story. Until a few years later. A few years later, Pretty Girl ends up dating one of my friends, and I finally got to hear the rest of the story. So Pretty Girl was actually Karen's daughter, and her parents were getting a divorce. Karen was a drunk. Apparently, she had been the one to get her daughter the paper route because she thought having the job would mean her daughter would have to be at her house every night, and never at her father's. Pretty Girl had tried the paper route and living with her mom for a while, but being the mean drunk that she was, that went downhill pretty quickly. And Pretty Girl wanted to go stay with her dad. When she did, there was no one to deliver the paper, and that's why she was fired. Now, it wasn't because they were a little late, but because 50 newspapers had not been delivered several days in a row. Without the paper job, Karen had lost her imagined bargaining chip and she was pissed, which is why she decided that I was public school enemy number 1. And that's why she kept trying to get me fired, even though all I had done was accept more work. She thought that getting me fired from the paper route that I'd been doing without complaint for 3 years would mean that her daughter would get the job back again, and her daughter would come back to her house. She had called the paper numerous times about me, and despite them having probably told her that the paper was not late, she decides to drive over to Pretty Girl's dad's house and give her the good news that she was getting her job back, and gave her a lift to school. That's when Pretty Girl told her mom that she didn't want the job or the lift, and that she wasn't supposed to come over when her dad wasn't there. Now Karen didn't like that, and she dragged Pretty Girl by her arm to the car. And that's when Pretty Girl goes straight to the office when classes start and asks to call her dad. He had picked her up while she was in the principal's office. Apparently what I told the principal was enough to corroborate Pretty Girl's story, which gave the principal what he needed to speak to the union and have her removed from my school's roster until Pretty Girl had graduated. That morning's event had also been a deciding factor in her dad getting full custody. This time, Karen did not get the kids. Guys, that woman was so off her rocker, and the fact that she went after a teenager to try to fire him and it backfired was hilarious. And I'm so happy to hear that Pretty Girl is with her father now, instead of mean drunk Karen. What a wild ride, right? And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our slash entitled people. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that like button. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, I'm going to link it right here. A Karen decides to berate a deaf customer. And it doesn't end well, guys. Check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.